Yeah, that's definitely true. I've represented people that I know are guilty, but that said, there's a lot of people I don't know. I mean, there's a lot of times where I think they probably did it, but I don't ask, and they don't divulge.
And on Tales from the Shift today is Joseph Simons, a criminal defense attorney who's based out of Boston with approximately 14 years of legal experience. Joe's the founder of Simons Law Office, and he handles high-stake cases ranging from federal fraud and drug trafficking to armed robbery and murder. Outside of the courtroom, Joe is a entrepreneur who owns Joe's Buds, which is a legal cannabis dispensary in Syracuse. Joe also runs a popular TikTok account about the legal world. It's over 100,000 followers. And here he is, Joseph Simons. All right, welcome to Tales from the Shift, Joe Simons. I'm really glad to have you on here, a criminal defense attorney. How are you today, sir?
Hi, Shane. I'm doing well, thanks, and I'm really happy to be here with you.
I think this is going to be excellent and exciting. So why don't we just start out with the basics? If you could tell us, what is a criminal defense attorney? Obviously, I think we have some ideas in our head, basically, but why don't you tell us the whole idea of the job?
Well, it's funny you say that because some people have jobs that they have to describe in sentences and sentences, and you just really don't know what they do. They're some sort of consultant or this or that. For me, I feel like most people do kind of understand it, but for people that really don't, I'm an attorney or a lawyer, so I represent people who typically are charged with crimes. So let's say you get charged with a crime, you get brought to court. People would hire me to represent them so that they don't have to do the talking. They don't know what to do, what the process is. So I walk them through it. I'm their mouthpiece, and making sure that the rights are protected and trying to challenge the allegations against them as they're going through the court process.
Excellent. Excellent. Do you have one of those very easy to remember phone numbers? I always see people with
Well,
those.
not bad. Yeah, the number on my website, 781-797-0555. So
Okay,
five by
okay.
five,
Not
a
bad.
little bit. It's not as great as some people, but it's it's a little
Yeah, you
memorable.
see some of these guys like 7777777. Like, well, how the hell did you even pull that off?
Exactly. They pay big money for those phone numbers.
Do they? Do they?
They do.
All right. Well, why don't you tell us how you became a attorney? How did you decide to do it, and why are you in it?
Yeah, sure. So when I was growing up, I never had any thoughts about being an attorney. When I was little, I wanted to be a baseball player. Then when I was a little bit older, I wanted to be a rock star. When I was in high school, I was playing guitar in a band, and that was really my dream. So much that I decided that I was going to go all in, and I kind of stopped paying attention in high school, dropped out of high school, and that was it. But at the same time, I also had gotten into a little bit of trouble along the way. So I ended up having an arrest for cocaine and some other minor things. So that really woke me up to the criminal justice system. I had never known much about it other than hearing about it. And I also had never thought that I might end up in jail. And I spent a few nights in jail before I went to court. Went to court in the morning after a long weekend, and I met this guy who was my public defender. Without asking me any questions at all, he told me I might get a plea deal. I might be able to get 6 months in jail. And I was shocked. I was worried. I was all the emotions. And over time, it struck me that this is not the way people should be represented. This is really, this is a guy that doesn't care. He's just trying to close his cases, didn't even ask me what happened. This was a case where I was in a car and the stuff was found in a car. I was with another person. So to me now, looking back, I'm like, that'd be a great case. I've defended much worse and gotten not guilties. This guy just was clearly looking to try to close the books on every case and plea people out. So it turned me off to that style of representation and public defenders in general. I just had a bad taste in my mouth from my experience. And I also really was surprised at how harshly the criminal system took nonviolent drug offenses, and people were going to prison for that. And I always felt like, well, since then on, I've felt people should get an opportunity to get treatment or to have other options rather than having criminal records and maybe going to jail and then making their future opportunities even less. So I just thought it was really counterintuitive. So anyway, all because of that experience, I ended up going to get my GED, got into college, and then went to law school for the purpose of being a criminal defense attorney.
Cool. Yeah, my dad spent a lot of time in prison for marijuana in the great state of Texas. So and that was the only thing he ever went in for, was just possession of marijuana, and it was a repetitive thing for him. But I personally think it's quite silly. Uh,
I'm sorry to hear that. I mean, that's awful because it sounds like he's not doing anything wrong to people. I mean, if you want to use marijuana or sell marijuana, I don't even care. I mean, even if someone's trafficking marijuana, it's marijuana. Like, it's better for you than alcohol. And alcohol is so prevalent, so legal, so celebrated. And I think Texas, it may still be illegal to possess marijuana. I'm not entirely sure, but I know there's a number of states where you still could face jail time for having
oh, I'm
marijuana.
sure. I'm sure their catch line is "Don't mess with Texas." So I have no doubt that they're still putting people in jail for that. And I was going to ask you who might have affected you to cause you to want to become an attorney. It sounds like you're run in with an attorney who wasn't effective. That
Yeah.
was a big deal for you.
Yeah, I guess I don't know if you'd call him inspiring, but it did inspire me to be a good attorney. The longer story of that is my parents scraped together money to hire a private lawyer shortly after we started with this guy. And then the other lawyer ended up getting me probation. But there was a time when I really thought I was going to do like a year or 2 years in prison just for the, nonviolent offense of possessing cocaine. And the other guy really seemed like he cared a lot more. I mean, I got to know him. He actually had me in the office. We talked. I don't know. I still think it would have been a great case to go to trial now in retrospect. But the other guy that we paid did a lot better. And so it sort of reinforced that terrible stereotype that public defenders are bad and they don't care. I
Yeah.
have since changed my stance on that. I think that now that I've met a lot of people that are public defenders, I've met a lot of people who do care and are providing good representation. So I don't think it's necessarily a fair stereotype, but it is a stereotype, and it's one that in my experience was nailed down. And for a long time, I really hated them.
Yeah.
Hopefully, just by being a good lawyer to my clients, I'll at least have some small impact on the people that I'm representing so they don't have to have somebody that they feel like doesn't care about them.
Yeah. Do you feel like the justice system is kind of slanted against people that don't have money? In other words, if you can pay for an incredible attorney, it sounds like you probably have better outcomes.
Yeah, I don't know if it's universal, but I definitely think there are times when having money can get you a better result. I mean, one, if you have a great attorney that has more time to devote, because all things being equal, you got two good attorneys, one's a public defender and one's private. The private attorney most likely has more time to spend, maybe more resources, maybe expert witnesses, maybe investigators, things that you might not get from a public defender who just by necessity only has so much time to spend on your case. So I think that's part of it. And then there's also part of it where, depending on the charge, if there's some economic harm that's done to a victim, people that have money and that can pay restitution, I have seen that make a difference in terms of either getting cases dismissed or getting charges reduced in a better outcome than somebody would face if they didn't have the capacity to offer to pay a big chunk of money for restitution.
Yeah. I mean, I can only imagine if your parents hadn't been able to scrape together the money they did, it sounds like your results wouldn't have been as positive as you
Right.
had.
And who knows? I mean, maybe, hopefully, I still would have made positive out of it, but I don't know. I mean, it really could have set me down a worse path if I had spent 6 months in jail at that beginning. And who knows who I would have met and what thoughts I would have had and what I would have been inspired by. And it really came at a time when I was still a young man. I was 19 years old, so I was still much more impressionable and really could have gone down a much worse path.
Right. Well, clearly you're an intelligent man, so maybe you would have been a criminal mastermind. Who knows?
Right. And then I would have really gotten in trouble down the line.
Right. Okay. So, let's say someone's listening to this and they're thinking, "Hey, I really want to do this." What would be the path that someone would take to become a criminal defense attorney?
If you think you want to do this, and I think this is probably true with most occupations, is that you want to talk to people who are doing it. So I get calls from people, usually people that are in college, but occasionally I've gotten high school students call and just want to talk and maybe shadow for a day. And I try to be as giving as I can without affecting, my representation and my obligations. But I've had people come and shadow me in court for a day or come to the office and just see how things operate. So I would encourage people, if you're seeing somebody doing what you think you want to do, reach out to them. Maybe they'll talk to you. Maybe they'll have coffee with you or let you come to their place of work. And I think it's helpful because you just don't really know unless you've seen it up close. There's a lot of things I didn't know about what being a lawyer would be like, because you see it on TV. And if you don't know anybody personally, like I didn't have anybody in my family who I knew was an attorney, so I couldn't say, oh yeah, here's what it's like on a day-to-day basis. Thankfully, I ended up liking it, but I think if I were starting over again, I would definitely try to meet people, try to do an internship while you're in undergrad or maybe even high school, and spend a little bit of time just to solidify that this is really what you want to do before you go all in and spend the time and resources that it takes to go to college and then law school.
Right. And then I know for physicians, they kind of send them out, tried this, these rotations to try different forms of practicing medicine. Do they do anything like that with law where you have to go out and try different things?
No, there's no formalized process. I know that in medicine it's much more formal, and I think everybody who becomes a doctor has to go through these residencies and different placements. No, in fact, a lot of people in my law school didn't do internships or didn't do more than maybe one internship. I was lucky I ended up doing three during law school, but no, there's none required, and a lot of people just don't. And if they do, a lot of times they're just on their own. Some schools I think are better at it. There's a school in Boston, Northeastern University. They have co-ops. They're sort of famous for it. They have co-ops where they alternate between, a session of school. They might do like trimesters instead of semesters. So they do, part school, then the next trimester or whatever, you're going to be placed with a law firm or with an organization. Then you go back to school, and they have a much more methodical approach. But no, I wish there was. I think that it would be great for law schools to have a more formalized approach and more relationships with agencies or law firms or other places where people might want to work when they're done with law school.
Yeah, yeah. And so the different angles one might take. We've got obviously yourself, criminal defense attorney. We have the public defender. What else would be some of the other angles someone might take with law?
Sure. Well, in criminal, the other big one would be the district attorney's office, and they're the ones on the other side. They're the ones prosecuting people. It never appealed to me personally, but I can understand some people may feel like, hey, they're doing a good job because they're protecting victims and protecting the community. And I understand that they have a job to do as well. So yeah, the district attorney's office, and here in Massachusetts, it's county by county. Every county has a DA's office, and then they staff the courts. Some states have attorney general's offices. The federal government has the U.S. attorney's office, which is also the prosecutors for federal court. That's for criminal. I mean, if you went beyond that, there is just a ton that you can do with a law degree. I know people that went to law school and didn't even become lawyers. They went into management, or they got their MBA, joint JD and MBA, and went into a different type of field altogether. And within the law, there's people that never enter a courtroom. There's a lot of people who just work in an office and do paperwork, and they're perfectly content never to go in the courtroom. I'd say criminal defense probably is the area where you'd be in the courtroom arguing and doing what you see on TV the most out of all areas. Family court is probably a close second, personal injury maybe also, and then civil litigation. But there's so many areas of the law if people are interested. And
Oh, you did remind me of an interview. I think I read it, of a prosecuting attorney a little while back, and he said the reason he went that angle, he was a defense attorney, and he didn't like that people were getting charged with nonsense crimes like we talked about before, and he said that he felt he could actually do more good from the prosecuting side to not prosecute nonsense and to focus on the things that actually matter. I don't know what you think about that.
that's an interesting angle. I will say that there's not a lot of people that I've known that have gone from the defense to the prosecution. I have known a couple, but few and far between. It's typical to have people that are prosecutors for a while, and then they come out into private practice, and then they become defense attorneys. But I kind of like the idea. I mean, as defense attorneys, we're just reacting to the charges that are filed. We don't have any say in what is actually filed, what cases are dismissed. We can make arguments, we can pitch ideas, we can try to push the prosecutor to dismiss cases or the judge to dismiss cases, but the prosecutor really does have a lot of authority and a lot of discretion. So I respect that. If somebody thinks that they can do a good job of focusing on the important cases and trying to get rid of some of the more minor ones, I can appreciate that. If I were a prosecutor, I think I would take that same approach. And there's certain things that I like about, the criminal system, I'll say. I don't even call it the criminal justice system anymore. I call it the criminal system because I feel like the justice is sort of questionable. But if I were a prosecutor, I would focus more on violent crimes. I think violent crimes are sometimes treated as such minor things. Assault and battery with a dangerous weapon. you can get probation for like really hurting somebody pretty badly. And I feel like if you're in a society and you're prosecuting cases, somebody that can't control themselves to the point where they're physically hurting somebody else should be among the worst of the worst. And when you compare that to somebody getting probation for a pretty bad assault or getting like 30 days in jail for a bad assault versus somebody who has a quantity of cocaine, let's just say 200 grams, it's not a huge quantity. And that in Massachusetts is the highest level of cocaine, for example, 200 grams and above, you face a mandatory minimum 12 years in prison. Nothing less, no matter what, unless the prosecutor lowers the charge, which they sometimes do. But just the difference between like a nonviolent crime and a violent crime, to me, you should really be focusing on the people that can't control themselves, that are disrupting society, making people afraid, versus something that just, So anyway, that I'll digress. But I think there are things that I could see as a prosecutor, you could actually do some good, or as a legislator, of course, you could do some good by changing some of those mandatory minimum laws.
Right. Okay. All right. So work-life balance. What's work-life balance for you or for an average attorney? What would you say?
Unfortunately, it's not as good as I had hoped it would be. I think when I was on the path toward becoming a lawyer, I always had in my mind that I'm going to work really hard, go to college, work really hard, go to law school, delay my earning capabilities for 7 years by going through the whole process. And I thought it would pay off because when I got out, I'd have a little bit easier time. Maybe I'd go into work at 11 a.m., leave by 4, I'd go golfing or whatever, whatever you have kind of stereotypically, you'd be able to leave and just have an easier time. Maybe you'd have a secretary who'd take the calls. It's not like that. I mean, at least not for me. Like I have a small firm, it's a very small firm, but I'm the boss. I'm the one that has to make sure the lights stay on, has to make sure I'm paying my employees, make sure that none of our clients slip through the cracks, that even though other lawyers are helping clients, ultimately my name's on the door, I'm responsible. So it comes with a lot of responsibility. And in some ways, I do have some work-life balance. If I have a court hearing and I have to leave work early, I can't really do a whole lot if I'm in court because the court controls so much of my schedule and it's difficult. Right. So if I have a trial, you really can't move a trial because, I scheduled a trial 3 months ago and now my son has a piano recital, let's just say. It sucks. That's hard. But if I don't have court and I want to leave at like 2:00 to pick up my kids from school, or if I have to be late to bring them to a doctor's appointment, then I'm a little bit more flexible. So it kind of depends. But I think being a courtroom lawyer, being in court a lot of days does limit your ability to have flexibility. And then on the other hand, you're not just working a 9 to 5. I mean, you leave when it's done. Or if you do leave, like I always leave and make sure I'm home for dinner because it's really important for me to spend time with my wife and my children at dinner time, but then I have to make up for it later. If I have a trial the next day and I haven't quite finished what I need to do, or a hearing or whatever it is, if I have a deadline, I have to finish it, even if that means spending 3 hours at night when my kids are sleeping, finishing that up. So I would say it's not the best for work-life balance, candidly.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like your lines are also crossed a little bit as someone who's running a business, right? So if we were to strip that away, are there any attorneys that work for you? Or
there are, yes. Yeah.
The ones who are not worrying about the business, they don't own a business. How's their work-life balance? Is it maybe a little better or
much better? Yeah, they leave around 5. They come in. I mean, they might answer an email once in a while off hours, but they're they have a better work-life balance. Even like, for example, I had a child less than a year ago. I took a couple weeks off, but then I'm pretty much back right away. I mean, it's hard because nobody else is leading the charge. I don't have a partner that's replacing me. Somebody else can't just step in and do what I'm doing with the business. So conversely, I have a lawyer that's pregnant now and about to go on her second maternity leave. She was out for like 5 months and I'm happy for her and that's great. But I also wish that I was able to do that sometimes. Like, geez, if I worked for somebody else, I wouldn't have to worry about all that. So I think you're right. I'm probably in a little bit different position being a business owner versus working for a firm where you actually have a little bit more work-life balance.
Yeah. And so obviously everybody thinks attorneys make a crap ton of money. So what would you say the least amount someone would make when they're first starting out and moving through the years? How would you describe that?
In Massachusetts, I would say whether you're working for, the DA's office or a public defender's office or even a small firm, the least you'd make is maybe like $70,000 or $75,000 starting out, which is not a ton, but it's better than when I was first starting out. I ended up having to go on my own out of necessity. That I came out in 2011, and it was still a few years after the recession, so not a lot of people were hiring. But when I first came out and I was looking at jobs, public defender's office was paying $40,000 a year starting, and this is not that long ago. This is like
No.
less than 15 years ago. DA's office was like $38,000 starting, and it would incrementally raise, but it was pretty bad. So the 70-75 may not sound great, but it's a heck of a lot better than what people were making when I started. So I'd say that's the sort of starting end of criminal law anyway.
Yeah. And moving up, I mean, where putting aside running a business, because I would imagine what you might take in or not take in from a business is going to be kind of a separate issue. But
Yeah.
as an attorney who doesn't own a business, what might they get going up to?
I think probably if I had to aggregate based on the people that I know, and mostly people that are just doing the attorney thing, not running a business, I'd say probably you'd be in the somewhere between 150, 175 ish for like a mid range of doing criminal defense. Obviously, there's some people that make a lot more, and there's some people that probably make less, but I would say it's probably about an average for the people that I know. So it's not huge money. I mean, criminal defense, unless you're doing like really big cases, and some lawyers are doing a lot bigger cases than others. Sometimes, I've had cases that are six figures. Like I've had big cases, but it also ebbs and flows. And I think if you really want a lot of money, the area that I would go into is personal injury. Personal injury lawyers tend to make a lot more money. Or if you're doing like business litigation or working for a big firm, they make a lot of money. I mean, there's lawyers working for big firms that come out of law school, and their first year they're getting paid over $200,000, and they don't know what they're doing. They're just starting out. They're baby lawyers, but that's just the top of the top.
After being attorney, what's you? I mean, obviously you can go into owning a business like you've done it yourself, but what are some other upward paths that someone might take? Is it being a lawmaker? Is that pretty much the ultimate goal for most attorneys, or what do you think?
I've met quite a few lawyers that would like to become lawmakers. They like to go into politics, whether it's state or federal, like going to Congress or something. A lot of people have ambitions like that. I've met other people whose ultimate goal is to become judges. And I've seen a number of my colleagues, people that I've practiced with, get up on the bench and become judges, which is always sort of surreal to see them up there making the decisions. I think those are probably the major ones, but being an attorney, especially if you are somebody that either goes to court or you're communicating with a lot of various people, I mean, with good communication skills and confidence, you could do anything. So,
yeah,
I don't know. I mean, I think that a lot of lawyers are entrepreneurial, even if they're just solo practitioners. I think out of necessity, people become entrepreneurial. So I've met lawyers who have expanded, mostly still practicing, but have expanded into doing other things. Like there's a guy who owns a restaurant in addition to being a lawyer. There's a guy that I know who has a laundromat in addition to being a lawyer. So maybe not big stuff, but having your hands in a couple different areas in addition to just being a lawyer.
How long have you been practicing law?
I've been practicing probably about 13 to 14 years at this point.
Okay. How about this? What type of person is this job for or not for?
I think necessarily is somebody who is independent, confident, and even if you're working for a firm, if you're in my line of business as a criminal defense lawyer, you're going to be on your own, having to answer questions, having to respond quickly, having to come up with objections, having to come up with a closing argument, sometimes without a lot of notice. And so you have to be willing to think on your feet, be willing to be self-motivating, because you're not always having somebody right there checking. When you're in the courtroom next to your client, it's just you and the client battling it out against the prosecution or against the judge. I think it's for somebody that likes people, because you're always dealing with people, a lot of people, prosecutor, the judge, the clerk's office, probation officers, clients, families. So you have to like people. I mean, if you don't, it's a miserable job. If you're somebody who just wants to keep to themselves, you're not going to be enjoying this business.
Not an introvert job. What I'm curious what you said about the no notice closing does that sometimes all of a sudden you go, oh, we're done and now I've got to do it, or just wing it?
Yeah, let me elaborate on that a little bit. And
Sure.
Before that, I'll just say this too. I was talking to my secretary the other day, and we were talking about what court is like, and I described it as sort of an improv thing. So if you like improv and you're good at improv, you'd be good at court. And maybe lawyers should take improv classes too, because that's what it is. It's always like yes and. Okay, what are we going to do with this? How are we going to shift? Because you walk in and you have a strategy. I mean, you have to have at least somewhat of a strategy. Maybe not word for word, but you kind of have, all right, this is how I'm going to present the case basically. Here's the narrative. And then you go in and you might have some great points, but depending on what somebody says on the witness stand, if you're good, you might have to shift right away and completely go in an opposite direction and maybe abandon one whole part of what you were going to say. But to the point of your question is, yeah, you are sometimes thrown into closing arguments. It's not like you go home for the day necessarily when the case is done. Whenever the case wraps up, yeah, you kind of know when it's going to wrap up. If it's a quick trial, it could be a one-day trial. If it's a longer trial, I've had some that are several weeks. Either way, you kind of know when it's wrapping up. And if it's a longer trial, like a month-long trial, you probably along the way, you're taking some notes and hopefully wrapping it up. But even then, you still have to put it all together, and you can't really solidify a closing argument without having everything in. That last witness is going to change things sometimes. So yeah, I've had times where you end a case that's 2 weeks long and the judge says, all right, counsel, you need like 10 minutes to think about your closings. I always say, yeah, of course. Like it's good to think about it, but you're kind of just
About lunch.
Lunch is better. Then you get an hour, but if it's 10 minutes or 5 minutes or whatever, you just have to kind of go with it. So it is what it is. But yes, there are many times where you're just having to like, okay, here we are. I better come up with something good. And I stand up there and inevitably something good usually comes out. But I think it's, in a way, it's good because you have to be willing to just go with it. I like to think closing arguments, you're better off not being tied to a piece of paper. I hate when lawyers are just reading from a paper, because even if the points that they're making are really good, if you're not connecting with the jury, they're not interested. I mean, you got to keep them attentive. And so I just kind of speak from the heart and just say it as if I'm saying it to somebody that's listening to me, like a friend or whatever. And I give them my spiel and hope for the best.
Very cool. So let's say someone just finished law school. They're going out into the world. What advice would you tell them? Something that you might say, definitely do this or definitely don't do this. Is there anything that comes to mind?
I would definitely say it's a small bar. I heard that when I was in law school. It's a small bar, meaning that your reputation goes around quickly. If people can trust you and people like you, that's good. But if you do something that's bad or unethical or treat somebody poorly, word gets around really quickly too. So hopefully, be a good person because it's the right thing to do, but also be careful when you're interacting with people. Even if you think it's somebody that you're never going to see again, you may be across from them in a courtroom sometime, or they might be somebody that's in a position of power or a position that can help you. And it's just interesting how you encounter people over and over again in this small community. Even in a place like Boston, that's a pretty decent sized city, you still see people over and over again. So treat people well. And honestly, I think that goes super far no matter what you're doing. Even if I'm going to get some paperwork from the clerk's office, sometimes it's like going to the RMV. It's difficult and they make you wait and they're not always happy to see you. But if you go in there and you've got a good attitude, they can make the difference between, here, I'm going to make you these copies in 10 minutes or have a seat for 2 hours and I'm going to make you wait and sweat it out.
Yeah. What's the RMV? I'm sorry.
It's like the Registry of Motor Vehicles. They call it the DMV.
Okay.
Like New York State and some other places. But yeah, nobody likes going to the DMV or the RMV. It's miserable. You got to wait. People aren't happy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Same thing with the clerk's office sometimes. But if you're nice and you treat people well, sometimes it's helpful. So the big takeaway from that is treat people well.
I agree. All right. So maybe you don't have this, but do you have a client, and obviously you can dance around the facts so that you don't reveal much, but is there any client from your past that you still think about today? And why do you think about them?
Yes, there's a number of clients I think about from time to time. First of all, I get to know people because they're involved in a huge situation, but we inevitably get to know each other a little bit, maybe not like super great friends, but we get to know each other. I get to know about their family life, their personal life, their business, whatever they're doing. And I don't know, when you're trusting somebody in such an intimate relationship as they're trusting me, I think inevitably you get to know them a little bit. And then I become I get invested, obviously. Like I'm not an unbiased person. I'm their advocate. I'm there because I'm trying to get the best result for them. So once we've been through a battle together, I do think about people from time to time. And if I had to pick just one example, because there are a lot of people who I've kept in contact with or have thought about from time to time, I would say that I've got a friend named Daryl, and I'm just naming his first name. He's on my website. He's been very open and willing to share his experience for the benefit of other potential clients. But Daryl's a good guy. Daryl's become a friend of mine, but I didn't know him very well. He was a constable. He was somebody who had served paperwork. Like, let's say you're going through a lawsuit, you got to serve the other side, like a process server. But in Massachusetts, constables actually could do other things because there were old laws that were on the books. I think they're still on the books, but as of Daryl's case, they were still on the books where constables could do police work. Before modern day police departments, constables could make arrests. They could bring people to jail. They could do a lot of things that the police were doing. And Daryl was a smart guy. He had no law enforcement experience. He was a tax preparer, but he was a smart guy. And he did research and he figured out that, hey, we can put this constable group together. And he led this group of 15, 20 people. He started this agency, very entrepreneurial and likable guy. And some of the law enforcement people didn't love what he was doing. And it was questionable whether or not it was all legal. But over the course of me knowing Daryl just a little bit, of having him do some paperwork, like, hey, I got a subpoena, can you serve this? I only met him a couple of times. And I remember one time he was like, hey, by the way, you do criminal law. Can I tell you about my case? And he ended up telling me about it. He had a lawyer. He was on his second lawyer, which is sometimes a red flag because that often means the client might be difficult. If they're not trusting their first couple of lawyers, then maybe they're unreasonable. But I heard him out and I was like, okay, interesting. He was accused of impersonating a police officer. He was accused of having firearms that civilians are not supposed to have, and also of providing those firearms to his various constables. There was 20 counts altogether, a bunch of different stuff related to that. But he was facing very real jail time. He would have gone to jail for quite a long time. And his second lawyer was supposedly this gun guru. And I remember when I took over the case, I finally agreed to take over. And the lawyer that he had right before me told me, hey, look, I know these laws in and out. You're cooked. You got nothing to work with. You got to convince your client to plead guilty. I've tried to no avail, but good luck. And he kind of just discarded, like, all right, whatever. And we went to trial. Some of the charges we ended up getting dismissed. I think we got about 8 of the 20 dismissed before trial. So we went to trial and we had, I believe it was 12 left over, picked a jury, went all the way to trial. And we got not guilties across the board. And it was just so satisfying. I mean, one, because most importantly, to help the client and know that this is a guy that had a wife and kids and like really, really was just, I mean, we cried when he won. I mean, it was just like, there's so much stress. So that was the biggest part, but also there's a little bit of like, oh yeah, like you didn't think we could win, like, to the other lawyer in my head, like, all right, yeah.
Did you ever
accepted.
you ever speak to him, that other attorney?
Not about that. I've encountered him a couple of times. I sort of lost respect for him after that, but I've encountered him and I've been polite. But no, I mean, yeah, but it's very satisfying because this guy who was a lawyer, a little bit older than me and had more experience and certainly knew gun cases, and this included gun charges, and told me we had no chance. So to win, it's just icing on the cake.
Yeah. You made me think of something. So you said you're in Boston and you kind of ran up against these older laws. For a city like Boston, this is clearly quite old compared to other cities. Do you feel like an attorney in Boston is going to run into situations where you run into old weird laws versus Phoenix, Arizona? Is that more of a common thing?
I never really thought of that, but as we're talking about it, it probably is true because so many of the laws just stay on the books. Somebody passes a law 200 years ago and it never gets amended. Yeah, I bet there is. I bet there's more laws that people don't really know about that are still on the books that either don't get enforced or people just don't read. Yeah, I would think a place like Boston probably is a little unique in that regard.
Interesting. All
Yeah.
right. So let's suppose someone you love gets arrested and charged with a serious crime. Would you represent them or would you hire someone else?
I think I'd probably recommend that they have somebody else on the case as a primary attorney. I would hope that I could still contribute some ideas, But I think it would be tough, honestly, if I had to have somebody that, like a family member or somebody who's a super close friend gets arrested. Two reasons. One is I think I'd be too emotionally involved, and it's never good to be emotionally involved. That's why even if you're a criminal lawyer, you shouldn't represent yourself because you're too emotionally involved, and you should be able to see the big picture and see both sides. But if you love somebody, you inevitably think the best of them, and you automatically sort of look at the bright side, and you might be a little bit blinded to the possibilities that you would otherwise see. So I think that's part of it. And then I think part of it too is you always got to think no case is guaranteed. I always tell my clients, I'll try my best. Can't make a guarantee about the results. And if you represent a family member or a close friend and things don't go well, either you go to trial and you lose, or they decide to take a plea, and it's not a great plea or whatever, like you risk eroding the friendship, or if it's a family member, then there's the potential for some negative consequences, which I think would also go back to why that would be a conflict of interest, because you might have, everyone has some self-preservation. So if you're thinking about the effect that it might have on you and your relationship with that person, you might be thinking about things that are not just for their best interest.
That makes sense.
Like maybe a plea is in their best interest, but you don't want to tell them to take the plea because you want to be their hero and take it to trial and try to win. Even though maybe if you were looking at it as an outsider and not their friend, you'd tell them, hey, look, you're going to do better with a plea than going to trial because the evidence just is terrible.
Right. Okay. If you had a magic wand and you could change anything about your career, about being a criminal defense attorney, is there anything you might change?
I probably would be less afraid to say no to cases in the beginning. I think that I've been more confident over time saying no to cases, but one is smaller cases. I think that I could have grown bigger, faster. I mean, now I've taken all sorts of cases. I've taken murders, rapes, armed robberies, complicated fraud cases in federal court, drug trafficking. But even when I was starting to take some of the bigger cases earlier in my career, I would still say yes to things like, I don't know, a shoplifting or a speeding ticket or something that's small, because I wanted to help people. Partly that, and partly because as a business owner, I'm like, all right, I take a few bucks here and there just because I want to make sure I'm keeping the lights on. And there's a fear of, hey, if you say no, you don't know when the next case is coming in. So I think one is being a little bit more confident to say no to cases, and relatedly to saying no to clients, because I'm never really worried about whether I can represent somebody by the charges that they have. Like if somebody has bad charges, there might be some lawyers who don't like sex cases or don't like drug cases or don't like whatever. I rarely have a problem with that kind of thing. It's more that I've overlooked red flags with clients. And I guess earlier on, I wish that there were certain clients that I had said no to, rather than saying, all right, yeah, fine, I'll take the case and hope that it works out. Because if you're seeing red flags in the beginning, like a client that either is already bashing their past lawyers, maybe they think they're smarter than lawyers, or they say, oh, this is an easy case, this is nothing, that's usually a red flag, because maybe that's the way they see it, but nothing's really an easy case. People that are rude, those are I think I wish I had learned earlier that it's okay to say no and politely decline certain clients.
Right. Okay. So people say criminal defense attorneys defend people that they know are guilty. Agree or disagree?
Yeah, that's definitely true. I've represented people that I know are guilty, but that said, there's a lot of people I don't know. I mean, there's a lot of times where I think they probably did it, but I don't ask, and they don't divulge.
So you don't necessarily want to know. You want them to. I've always wondered how that works. So if I hire you and I know I'm guilty, you don't want me necessarily coming right out and saying it, or like, what would you like?
Well, let me say this. I think that people who are actually innocent tend to tell me that they're innocent, and they say, oh, this didn't happen, and here's what happened. They're anxious to get that out off their chest, in my experience. But absent that, when I'm asking people about the case, I will ask questions, but I don't usually ask whether they did it. And there are differences of opinion. When I was first starting out, I had a mentor, and that was his style. He wouldn't ask people, and I kind of like that. I've since met lawyers that do, and they say, hey, I need to know every detail, and I need to know whether you did it, whether you didn't do it. But I've more felt comfortable with the idea that, one, I don't need to know unless it's relevant. I mean, that there's no reason I need to have the client look me in the eye and admit that he committed a heinous crime, because how is that really going to help me? The only reason I would really need to know is if we're going to trial and if the client has any inclination that they might want to testify, then we practice. And then we have to practice. And then we really have to go over the nitty gritty. And I do have to know for sure, did they do it? Did they not do it? And if they did it, well, then I have to advise them not to testify because I can't have somebody lie on the stand. So then I really have to know, or if they did something that was less than, then we can talk about whether or not they still testify and just accept that they're going to be potentially convicted of something lesser, or do we just not have them testify? So absent that, I usually don't ask. And sometimes there's a mutual understanding, I think, that I'm thinking in my head that they probably did it, and they probably know I know because it is what it is. Maybe we got some video evidence that doesn't look great or circumstantially. But if I've committed to representing a client and if I ever felt like I couldn't give them 100% or I had some qualms about it, I would withdraw. I haven't had to do that yet. And I guess I compartmentalize. I don't know. I don't know how to explain it, but I don't look at these cases as real. Like somebody that's accused of a really bad crime, like a murder, for example. I like talking about it with you. If I'm thinking about somebody killing somebody and a family losing a loved one, like obviously that's horrible. And I'm very sympathetic when I hear about situations like that. But if I'm in it somehow, and I think this is my own self-preservation, but somehow I compartmentalize and I don't even look at this as like real people being impacted. I look at my client as a real person, and they're the ones I'm defending, and they're the ones I'm trying to do anything I can ethically and legally to get off of the charges, because that's really my job. Some people say, oh, I'm just representing their constitutional rights. Yeah, but you're also trying to get them off. I mean, if you're doing a good job, you're trying to get them off by any legal means possible. So I don't know. I don't look at it as a real person having lost in a tragedy. And I think if I did, it would just be too hard. So I look at it as like, all right, this is almost like a game. Maybe that's not the best way to put it because it's real life, but I just don't think of it. I'm thinking, okay, legally, what are we doing? Like, how do we get this evidence out? Can we argue to exclude this or suppress that or knock this out? Or, how do I get this person to be questionable in terms of their credibility? Like, what can I do to sort of undercut their investigation or the likelihood that they witnessed what they said they witnessed? And I'm not really thinking of the impact that it's having on them holistically.
Yeah.
So yeah, the short answer is yes, definitely criminal lawyers represent people who they know are guilty or think are probably guilty.
What about, can you tell us about the worst day you've ever experienced as a criminal defense attorney, or maybe the best day, whichever you want to do?
The worst or the best? Well, I mean, the best, I don't know if I can have the best one day, but it's always when somebody really gets off when you don't think they're going to get off. Like, I don't know. My first really, really big trial was a rape case. And I had a client who doesn't really matter the details so much, but it was a college kid and he was with his friend, and it was the friend's girlfriend who made the claim, but they had conflicting stories. This is my first superior court trial. In Massachusetts, we have district court for lower level stuff and then superior court for everything up to murder. So it's my first superior court trial. I ended up sharing the fee with a lawyer who had a lot more experience than me. He had been a former prosecutor and then a defense lawyer for another 10 years. So he probably had about 25 years of experience. And I was like, I don't know, 5 years out or so when I did this first big trial. I remember meeting with the client, and I remember my co-counsel, who was second seating me, telling the guy, you listen, the best you're going to get is indecent assault and battery, which is a lower charge, still a felony, but it's a lower charge. And maybe you can only do a little bit of jail time or whatever. And actually, I mean, to his credit, I think that wasn't bad advice, but the client didn't want to do it. And we ended up going to trial. And again, won. So that was another example, except I didn't have bad feelings about this guy. I think he was trying to do right by the client, but he was less willing to take risks, I guess, than the client was. And I was happy that the client wanted to take the risk because I felt like we had a better chance than my co-counsel. Different people have different risk tolerances too in life. So,
Sure.
but that was a really big one. One, because it was my first really big trial. It was my first trial in superior court in front of 12 jurors. In district court, we do 6 jurors. Superior court's 12. But also because, again, I love doing things when people say that's an impossible case to win, and then you win the case. So that was a big one. And I was really happy to help the client, and also personally just to do something that somebody says I couldn't. Everyone likes to be the underdog and to prove somebody wrong when they say you can't do it. So I think that's probably the best. And in terms of the worst day, I don't know if I've had like one day I can say is, you know what, here's an example. And I'm just thinking of this off the top of my head, but there's a guy that I had represented, and this was earlier on in my career. I had done some court appointed work. So I've always been in private practice, but in Massachusetts, private lawyers can do court appointed work. It pays awful. And by this point, I was losing money based on the overhead that I had at the office. I was just doing it because I thought it was a good way to give back to the people who need good lawyers but couldn't afford it. So I was doing this, and it was a bank robbery, but it was a guy who had a Nintendo power, like back in, original Nintendo, they had those fake guns you'd play duck hunt with. And so he cut off the cord, turned it into a black looking gun. And, if you flash it real quick, you might not know. So he robs a couple of banks. And he's a guy that before I represented him had robbed banks. And unfortunately, he robbed 3 banks in a very short span of time. He had a family member who identified him for the police. And so, he was wearing like a fake beard or fake mustache or something, but it wasn't that hard to tell it was him, especially when you had a family member who was up there testifying. And so this guy had like a history of maybe 3 other cases that were bank robberies, and he'd done some time for. But this time he was facing a lot. He was a habitual offender. So in Massachusetts, it's kind of like an armed career criminal, but it's slightly different. If you have 3 or more qualifying cases, once you're on your 3rd, you can have to be sentenced to the max of what the charge is. So anyway, long story short, it was a terrible case. We really didn't have a great defense, but the client wanted to go to trial. He wasn't being offered anything reasonable. I mean, he would have done double digits in prison anyway. And he did end up getting sentenced to prison, and he got like 20 years in prison. And it was sad because even though I'm sure he affected the bank tellers and people were scared, he didn't have a real gun. He also it stemmed from a drug issue. And this was a guy that had tried to kick drugs, and the cycle of trying to get clean is very difficult for people. There was a guy that had been addicted to opiates for years and years and years. And it hurt to see him going and being sentenced. It was like a pit in my stomach to see him being sentenced and going to prison for 20 years. And he was a guy who really hadn't been violent with anybody. And although you could say bank robberies are violent, he didn't have the capacity to hurt anybody. He didn't even have a real gun. But because of the laws and because of his history, that's one that I really, it hurts. It's a tough one.
Do you think that you could have pled that one down from what he ended up getting if you hadn't gone to the jury?
Well, he and I talked a lot about it. I think that the offer was somewhere around 12 years, maybe even 10 to 12 prior to trial. And we really thought hard about it. I had, at the time, I thought that that was a reasonable deal given what would happen after trial. We knew was going to be a lot more. And it was a situation where I wish the facts were a little bit better, but they were so against him and that was the best we could do. And that was negotiated down. I mean, it was, I don't know, it started at like 18 to 20 or something. I mean, we had gotten down, and unfortunately the prosecutor held all the cards because there was mandatory minimum time. And so a judge couldn't have done anything better for us. And I did everything I could to the prosecutor, provided as much information. I have no regrets about what I did. There's nothing I could have done to make the plea offer better. I went so far above what I could have ever thought of, but
yeah,
it's still, so I don't know if it's a regret, but it was a bad day. And I've been in touch with the guy a few times ever since, and he certainly doesn't blame me for it. And we're on good terms, but I just feel bad. I wish there was some alternative. Like I was saying earlier, sort of like not going to jail for drugs. I know this isn't directly for drugs, but indirectly, this is a guy who has underlying drug abuse issue. Sure. And that's really the reason for this. So it felt like it wasn't doing him any good, and it wasn't doing society any good in the long term.
Okay. So let's suppose you won the lottery tomorrow. Filthy, filthy rich. Would you still practice law?
Not like I'm doing now. I wouldn't have the same grind. That's for sure. If I won, I don't know exactly what I would do. I would probably still do some cases, and I would just do pro bono cases that I really was into. I would just pick, I'd be able to pick and choose, and I might only have like 1 or 2 cases at a time that I could really focus on. and just give such good representation to somebody who doesn't have the capacity. And maybe I'd even travel to do it. Maybe I'd do it outside of Mass, and I would just, find really compelling cases where people otherwise wouldn't be able to afford a lawyer and just go all out. And I think that's what I would do. And then I would just do it because I want to, rather than having to keep the lights on and just taking cases because I got to pay my employees.
Yeah, no, that sounds quite noble. Okay, if you had to define success in your career as a criminal defense attorney, how would you possibly define that?
Overall, I would define success in the career as being satisfied with what you're doing and feeling good about it, and actually being able to make an impact on people's lives while being able to take care of yourself. And I think it's definitely a balance. I talked about work-life balance earlier not being necessarily the greatest, but I think you do have to make sure that you're having time to exercise, having time with your family, having time to eat right, to sleep right, and all that stuff. And I think if you can do that and you can take care of yourself and enjoy your life while also helping other people, then I think it's a noble thing. And I would define that as a successful criminal practice. And being ethical. And I think that's a really important part, because winning isn't everything. Obviously, it is the goal for a lot of people to quote unquote win, whether it's a dismissal or not guilty. But I think doing that without compromising your morals and making sure that you're ethically doing the right thing and legally doing the right thing and not taking shortcuts, but still fighting like hell and doing everything you can to beat a case, then I feel like you're doing the right thing.
Yeah. All right. All right. So can you tell us about going to trial? What it's like, what the process is?
Yeah. So do you mean more like going to trial, like getting ready for trial, or actually being at trial, or just
Getting ready. I'm curious about getting ready, and maybe we'll go into the other one a little bit, but I'm curious about the getting ready.
Getting ready for trial is a whole thing. It's like a whole nother case. You could be having a case for a while where you're negotiating or getting evidence or filing motions. But once you get a trial scheduled and you're in trial mode, there's a lot. I mean, first you got a big deadline. You got to make sure you're filing any trial motions in advance. You get your witness list ready. You subpoena witnesses that you don't know are going to be there. And that's when you really have to dig in and make sure that there's no surprises. That's when I always start really talking to my client about the potential to testify, whether they want to get on the stand or not, or even if they have an inkling that they might, then we go over their testimony. We practice. I always have to tell them, of course, tell the truth. We're not practicing, so I'm going to change your answers. But I can give feedback in terms of, hey, you're going on way too long. Keep your answers simple.
What percentage of your defendant of the
Less than half. I would say it's more common for a client not to testify. I don't know exact numbers. If I had to guess, I would say maybe like a quarter of them, maybe a quarter to a third of them testify, but more often they don't.
Okay.
And a lot of times we'll practice not knowing, because the client doesn't have to decide for sure. There's some people that they want to testify and they're going to testify no matter what. It's ultimately their choice. I'll advise them. But then there's a lot of people who are kind of looking to me for advice. And so we'll practice, we'll get ready, get them comfortable with the kinds of questions that I would ask and the likely questions the prosecutor would ask, just so they're comfortable and ready. But a lot of times, even if we practice, clients will ultimately decide not to. And the key, kind of the rule of thumb that I use is, why don't we see how it's going? I tell the clients, you're going to be next to me the whole time in trial. You're going to hear the same things I'm going to hear, see the same things I'm going to see. And if we both feel that trial's going pretty well, by the time it would be your chance to testify, it might be better not to testify, because you don't want to lose if you're winning. And if you go on the stand, there's always a risk. The prosecutor could get a really good cross-examination in. You might come across a little poorly because you're nervous, even if you're telling the truth, even if you're innocent. So if you're not doing so hot, or you feel like you're not sure that the trial's going really well, then maybe you can go on and save it by coming across really well and likable and believable.
How often have you had a client on the stand and the prosecutor asks a question of them and you're in your seat going, oh shit, why we did not cover this, or something like that?
I had a guy once that was on the stand, and he was accused of breaking things at a car dealership, and he went into the woods and the police dog went after him, and they really bit him up pretty good. And the prosecutor was cross-examining him. And I don't know what the question was, maybe about what happened after the dog found him. And he was talking about how he got attacked, and then he said, quote unquote, then I shitted myself. And I looked at the judge and I looked at the jury and I was like, did I just hear that? I mean, I don't know. It was clearly wasn't expected, but especially not in a courtroom. And we'd practiced a lot, but
What wasn't in the practice run?
oh, I shitted myself. I mean, he did shit himself, but I don't know that I would have said that or it wasn't even necessarily relevant. And I don't know, just the way he said it was
That's funny.
unexpected.
Yeah. Okay. So clearly, you've dealt with people who you probably consider to be unsafe, for lack of a better term. Have you ever felt unsafe in your career?
I've had people who are come across pretty aggressively. I've never been attacked or personally threatened necessarily, but I've dealt with people that I've thought maybe the person's a little bit unstable or what if things don't go well? Kind of crosses the back of your head. But what happens if it doesn't go well? Are they going to be pissed off? Are they going to freak out? Are they going to attack? Yeah, sometimes. I know a lawyer personally he's an older guy than me, probably in his 60s, and he's done a lot of cases. One time he was attacked by a client in court. He was actually physically attacked. He was punched and they ended up in a big scuffle. It doesn't happen a lot. I mean, but yeah, I mean, there are people who you think probably are unfortunately not capable of controlling themselves.
So you have a dispensary business.
I do.
Why don't you tell us about that? How a criminal defense attorney got in that position?
What you might not know is that I used to sell weed when I was in high school. When I first started trying marijuana, I was like, damn, this is expensive. So I just went right and I was like, you know what? Instead of just buying weed, why don't I buy a little extra and sell some to my friends? And then they'll get some like they were going to anyway, and then I'll get some free weed. And then I built up and built up and and again, I dropped out of high school, so I wasn't going on maybe the best path, but I was pretty entrepreneurial. I really enjoyed selling weed and got pretty good at it. But around the time I got in trouble, obviously I realized I should probably change course and maybe that wasn't the most productive thing to do. So then as I told you, I became a lawyer. But a couple years ago, New York State opened up the possibility of people opening legal dispensaries for the first time. And being from New York originally, I satisfied all the points. I still had a bank account from when I was a kid, which was one of the ties you had to have to New York. You actually had to have a marijuana charge on your record, which I did from my bad experience. Never thought that would be on my resume. And I've always been intrigued with the dispensary, the idea of dispensaries and having a dispensary. And I enjoyed selling weed. I mean, it sounds maybe weird to say, but I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the aspect of you're meeting different people, you're making people happy, and it's not a very stressful job other than the part that you might get caught by the police. So I threw my hat in the ring, I applied, and I got it. And now I own a dispensary called Joe's Buds in Syracuse, New York. And I've been going back and forth. And I got to say, like, when I'm there, I'm working all day. We're open 10 to 9. I was just there, was it earlier this week or last week? Anyway, I spent a few days there very recently and I was working on shift, like as a bud tender, but also going back and forth and doing other stuff. And it does not feel like work at all. It's so fun. People are so happy. I mean, coming from a stressful job as a criminal defense lawyer where people's lives are hanging in the balance, going to a weed dispensary and having people be like, oh, hey, Joe from Joe's Buds, like, nice to see you. And people are like happy. They're just happy. It's such a nice place. I could work there from 10 to 9, walk out, and I feel like I had a really good day, even though I'm actually working the entire time I'm there.
Cool. What about student pilot? You're doing some flying?
I'm doing some flying too, yeah. So in my free time, which I don't have a lot of, I've been practicing student piloting in Beverly, Massachusetts. It's a tiny little airport, tiny little plane. These planes are very small. It's like pilot seat, co-pilot seat, and then 2 in the back. But you're like scrunched up. It would be like a very small, like the smallest car, but really even smaller. But it's fun.
Yeah, I used to be a flight instructor.
Oh, you were? So
yeah,
you know all
I
about
gave that
it,
up a long time. Well, I kept almost dying, so I said I don't want to.
Don't tell me that. I don't want to hear that.
It's very dangerous
Oh,
because of poor students. I'm sure.
okay,
I'm
all
sure
right.
you're fantastic. Yeah, no, I'm sure you're fantastic.
So
Yeah.
you were a CFI then.
Oh yeah, and a commercial pilot. I got all that stuff going. I was supposed to be an airline pilot, and then 9/11 happened, and that just killed that. So that was over.
Wow. Oh, geez, I should be
Yeah.
interviewing you. It sounds like you got some interesting backstory too.
So let's get back to law a little bit here. Better Call Saul. A lot of people enjoyed that show. Clearly, it's about an attorney as the main figure. Do you have any comments about it? How realistic would you say the show is?
In some ways, Better Call Saul is more realistic than you would think because obviously it's like a caricature of a bad lawyer, bad ethics, and all that. But I think at its heart, it actually shows that one, there are a lot of pressures on lawyers from all different sides. Even you see little clips of him trying to find a parking space near the court. And I'm like, yeah, that's real. Like that sucks. And then you got the competing interests of the judge being mad at you, disappointing your client, trying to still collect the money from the client who's now upset with you for being late and it's not your fault. And the guy at the parking garage is being a jerk to you. So some of that stuff is very relatable, but also at a deeper level, I think that when a lawyer is out there lawyering, you got a lot of pressure. You can see why somebody might want to offer you money to bring drugs to a client in a jail setting or something like that. Lawyers have gotten in trouble for that in real life. Even in the recent past, I read an article within the last year, somebody did that, I think in Massachusetts. So you can see that there's temptations like you'd see in Better Call Saul or to have somebody lie on the stand. It would be very easy if you could just win cases by manufacturing testimony or coming up with a witness who wasn't really there. It would be very easy to do that. So you could see the pressure to win and the pressure to perform and try to do well for the clients who are paying you a lot of money. They exist, but you have to resist them. And obviously good lawyers and ethical people are not going to do those things. But I think that it does portray some realistic pressures or, I don't know, I guess opportunities may not be the best word, but paths that lawyers can be offered that somebody like Saul obviously couldn't overcome or he succumbed to them. But yeah, in some ways, I think it's actually a deeper show than you might think at surface level.
Yeah. I mean, I think Breaking Bad, which came before that, he was clearly down the rabbit hole of being, as Jesse says, a criminal attorney when they went to go into the building for the first time. Did you laugh when Jesse said that? I'm just curious.
I don't remember exactly, but I probably did chuckle a little bit. Yeah, no, and I'm sure they exist. I'm sure there are people like that. But again, I think it does represent the very real nature of there's a lot of competing interests there, and you could really succumb to making bad decisions. I mean, every week there's I get a publication called Lawyers Weekly, Massachusetts Lawyers Weekly. And one of the things that I always turn to is the discipline section. And without fail, there are a number of disciplinary cases. And I read them partly to just make sure that whatever they're doing, I'm not doing. And usually I'm like, it's not nothing I'm doing, thank God. But yeah, you always wonder. And a lot of times it's about money. It's like people are using their clients' money, taking it out of the trust and doing stuff. And it tends to be about money. But yeah, so all I'm saying is that lawyers unfortunately do end up making bad decisions and getting in trouble. And so Saul obviously went to the extreme, but there's some truth to it.
Yeah. And then I guess you have a TikTok. I'm surprised about that. So TikTok at not guilty. What's that about?
Yeah, at not dot guilty. It's something I started maybe in 2020, and I did it. I heard about it, and at first it was like a kid's platform, but I heard somebody told me about it, and they were like, oh, some professionals are in it. Might have been Gary V. You probably know Gary V, right? If you don't know Gary V, you should look up Gary V. Anyway,
I don't use TikTok at all.
He's all over the place. He's like the ultimate entrepreneur. And it might have been him that I heard it from, Gary V, like VEE. It's really Gary Vaynerchuk. Anyway, I'm a big fan now, but he had talked about TikTok earlier on. And so I did it. I didn't even put my name on there. I just did it sort of anonymously. I mean, my face was there and it was me, but I wasn't like trying to get clients out of it. I wasn't telling people like, hey, I'm in Boston, like call me. I would just do either little skits that were based on real situations that I thought were funny, or I would talk about my day and say, hey, I was just in trial today and here's what happened and here's what was good, here's what sucked, like whatever. And people liked it, and I've gotten over 100,000 followers on there, so I've done pretty well. And funny enough, even though my name still isn't on there, I did end up putting my website in the bio, and I've had clients hire me from TikTok, which is funny because one, I never meant to do that, but two, I was actually afraid at first that people would think this was silly. And I was worried that current clients would say like, oh, my lawyer's actually a little too silly. Like maybe he's not a serious guy. And I worried that that would be portrayed. But in fact, I've had the opposite. I've had clients say, no, this actually makes you a real person. I feel more comfortable because I know that you're not just a robot lawyer that's very serious in courtroom, that I know that you're also have a sense of humor and that you have interests and you're doing other things. And even like judges have seen it, prosecutors have seen it. I got a compliment from a police officer recently who follows me on TikTok of all people, which is funny, but I guess it's become something I enjoy doing. It's sort of an outlet. And it was an unintentional marketing place, but it's more just for my own fun enjoyment, putting out these skits and whatnot.
All right. All right. Final question. Last question here. What is a secret that most people do not know about being a criminal defense attorney?
Well, one secret is that you have to keep a lot of secrets. And I don't know if it's really a secret, but it's definitely something that you have to do. And it's interesting because you meet people that they'll tell you the craziest stuff, something that they may not have told anybody else in their life. And then you're meeting like like, I don't know, for example, somebody might tell you about how much they're cheating on their wife. And then you go into court and you meet their wife and you like know all this depraved shit about how they've been hooking up with prostitutes or doing all sorts of crazy shit. And then you got this woman who's like a nice lady and thinks that she's got a good marriage. And in my head, I'm like, I can't say anything, but this is kind of fucked up. And so you end up in situations where you end up knowing a lot about people and you can't disclose it. So I don't know if it's not a secret, but it's about secrets and
Fine.
it's interesting, but you got to be prepared that you're going to have a lot of tea that you can't share with people.
All right, Joe Simons. Appreciate you taking time out of your busiest day. Thanks for coming on Tales for the Ship.
Thank you very much, Shane. It was a pleasure.
That was Joe Simons, criminal defense attorney out of Boston. If you've been accused of a crime, give Joe a call. I'm sure he can help you out. And if you enjoyed this content, please like, subscribe, a little comment down below, and tell me what you think about the show. And if you think you have an interesting job you'd like to be on here, then email me at talesfromtheshippodcast@gmail.com, and I'll get you on the show. I'll talk to you later.